Imagine for a moment that you are forced to perfect a killing machine, that every technical decision you make condemns hundreds of lives, that your silence is complicit, but your voice can destroy you. This is exactly what happened to a man whose name has almost disappeared from history. A man who did the unthinkable. He sabotaged Auschwitz from within. If this story gives you chills, subscribe now. Because what you're about to discover in the next few minutes will shatter everything you thought you knew about World War II. Some truths deserve to be told, even when they hurt. January 1944. Snow blankets occupied Poland in a white, icy shroud. The railway tracks leading to Auschwitz-Birkenau are frozen solid, but the trains keep arriving, day and night, without a break. Inside the cattle cars, hundreds of people are crammed together, motionless, terrified. They don't yet know that they have just entered the largest industrial death complex ever built by humankind. It is into this setting of methodical horror that Major Colin Rourke arrives. 42 years old, a civil engineer by training, originally from Ohio. An ordinary, tired face, marked by years of unemployment and economic humiliation. Rourke is not an ideologue. He is not a convinced Nazi. He is simply a broken man who accepted a position one doesn't refuse when one has lost everything. His official title, First Deputy Commandant, responsible for optimizing the camp's logistics. In plain terms, he was to make the machine run faster, more efficiently, with less downtime. He was given diagrams, production reports, statistics on the throughput of the gas chambers. Everything was presented as an engineering problem. Nothing was human. Everything was quantified. On the first day, Rourke toured the facilities with an SS officer named Hauptsturmführer Klaus Dietrich. He was a dry, precise man who spoke of death with the same tone an accountant might use to discuss profit margins. Dietrich explained that the camp was now processing over 12,000 people a day. The crematoria operated around the clock. But there were bottlenecks, delays, inefficiencies. Dietrich shows Rourke the tracks leading directly to the selection ramps, the overcrowded barracks, the temporary mass graves, and the Zyklon B reserves stored in guarded warehouses. He explains that the Reich expects more results, that Berlin is impatient, that every hour lost is a betrayal of the war effort. Rourke nods. He takes notes. He asks technical questions, but inside something breaks. Because what he sees isn't a war. It's a factory whose end product is the pure and simple disappearance of human beings. At night, in his austere room in the camp's administrative building, Rourke doesn't sleep. He watches through the window as the chimneys belch black smoke into the starry sky. He hears the muffled cries coming from the prisoners' barracks. He smells the pervasive stench of burning flesh that soaks into every square meter of Auschwitz. And it was there, in that icy silence, that a crazy idea began to take root in his mind. What if, instead of optimizing this machine, he sabotaged it? Not spectacularly, not with explosions or revolts, but from within, slowly, technically, by creating micro-malfunctions that no one could attribute to malicious intent. It's a suicidal idea. He knows it. But it's also the only one that allows him to look at himself in the mirror without vomiting. In the following days, Rourke began to observe the system with fresh eyes. He noted the guards' schedules, the gaps in surveillance, the points where the Nazi bureaucracy was caught in its own trap. He discovered that the camp operated on ultra-precise daily reports. If a figure didn't match, internal investigations could be launched. But if the errors were minor, random, and scattered over time, they could go unnoticed. Then Rourke begins, discreetly, almost imperceptibly. He delays the delivery of spare parts for the locomotives by falsifying purchase orders. As a result, the trains arrive several hours late. A few hours during which some prisoners have time to drink water, breathe, and survive a little longer. He alters the rotations of the Sonderkommando teams, the Jewish prisoners forced to empty the gas chambers. By creating slight confusion in the schedules, he causes unplanned breaks, moments when no one works, moments when the machine grinds to a halt. He manipulates the prisoner counts by entering inaccurate numbers in the registers. Some deportees are officially listed as dead while still alive. Others disappear from the lists before they even arrive. In the bureaucratic chaos of Auschwitz, these minor anomalies trigger no immediate alarm, but every act of sabotage is a deadly gamble. Rourke knows that all it takes is a surprise inspection, a suspicious glance, a well-placed witness for everything to collapse. And the sentence for a traitor is final: torture, interrogation, public execution. Yet he continues, because he has seen something he cannot forget. One night, 2 weeks after his arrival, Rourke was conducting a routine inspection of the crematorium area. It was 3 a.m. All was silent except for the low rumble of the furnaces. Suddenly, he heard a noise. A stifled sob. He approaches. Behind a pile of metal crates, he discovers a little girl. She can't be more than 7 years old. She's wearing a torn dress too big for her. Her eyes are huge, terrified. She's trembling with cold and fear. Rourke froze. He knew she should have been gassed as soon as she arrived. Children never survive selection. But there she was, alive, hidden, probably protected by a prisoner who had risked everything to save her from death. Their eyes meet. The little girl says nothing, neither does Rourke. He should report her, he should call the guards. But he doesn't. He takes a chocolate bar from his pocket, hands it to her and turns around. He will never see her again. But that image will remain etched in his mind forever. It was on that night that Colin Rourke ceased to be a mere survivor. It was on that night that he became a saboteur. And this is just the beginning. Colin Rourke never wanted to be a hero. In fact, he never wanted to be anything important. Before the war, before Auschwitz, he was just an ordinary engineer trying to survive the Great Depression. He had a modest apartment in Cleveland, a wife he loved, and a 5-year-old son who drew trains on every wall of the house. Then everything collapsed. In 1938, the factory where Rourke had worked for 15 years closed down. The layoffs were massive, brutal, and without warning. Overnight, he found himself without a salary, without prospects, with a family to feed and creditors knocking on his door every week. His wife, Margaret, tried to cope. She took odd jobs, cleaned houses, and sold her jewelry. But shame was eating Rourke up inside. A man who cannot provide for his family, he thought, is no longer really a man. It was in this state of despair that he received a letter, a strange proposition almost too good to be true. An organization linked to European investors was looking for American engineers for industrial projects in Germany. The salary was generous, housing was provided, and above all, it was a chance to start over. Rourke signed without asking too many questions. He said goodbye to Margaret and his son, promising to return in a few years with enough money to rebuild everything. He didn't yet know that he had just sold his soul. The first few months in Germany were disconcerting. He underwent intensive ideological training, courses on Aryan racial superiority, and seminars on industrial efficiency applied to Reich policies. Rourke realized too late that he hadn't been recruited to build bridges or civilian factories. He had been recruited to optimize the Nazi death machine. When he wanted to leave, they made it clear that it was no longer an option. Compromising photos were produced. Falsified documents were used to prove his alleged voluntary cooperation. Thinly veiled threats were made against his family back in the United States. Rourke was trapped, and that is how he ended up in Auschwitz, wearing a uniform he despised, obeying orders that were destroying him from the inside. But since that night when he met the gaze of the hidden little girl, something had changed. He decided that if he couldn't escape this nightmare, he could at least fight it, in his own way, silently, with the only weapon he possessed, his engineer's brain. Weeks pass. Rourke refines his sabotage techniques. He learns to identify the moments when the system is most vulnerable. Guard changes, nighttime deliveries, routine inspections that create windows of inattention. He begins to forge discreet connections with some of the prisoners who work in the camp's administrative sections. These men and women, often Jewish intellectuals capable of speaking several languages, are forced to keep records, file documents, and compile death statistics. Rourke quickly realizes they are his potential allies. One of them is named Samuel Levin. He is a former mathematics teacher from Warsaw, deported with his entire family in 1943. His wife and 2 daughters were gassed upon arrival. He survived only because he knew how to type and spoke fluent German. Now he spends his days recording the names of the dead in notebooks he knows no one will ever read. Rourke and Levin often cross paths in the administrative offices. At first, they don't speak. Then one day, Rourke drops a document near Levin's desk. It's a falsified report on a coal delivery for the crematoria. The figures don't add up. It's a deliberate error, obvious to anyone who bothers to check. Levin picks up the document. He looks at Rourke. Their eyes meet. No words are spoken, but a message is conveyed. Levin understands. Rourke knows he understands. From that moment on, they became silent accomplices. Levin began to introduce his own errors into the records. Prisoner numbers transcribed incorrectly, death dates shifted by a day, convoys disappearing from the official statistics. Nothing spectacular, just enough to create chaos in the Nazis' obsessive bureaucracy. But this deadly game cannot last forever, because Auschwitz is not just a concentration camp. It is also a battleground for SS officers seeking to prove their loyalty and effectiveness to the Reich. And among these men, there is one particularly dangerous one, Obersturmführer Hans Müller. Müller arrived at the camp in early February 1944. He was an ambitious young officer, fresh out of the SS officer training school in Bad Tölz. He was 28 years old, with an angelic face and a chillingly clinical cruelty. Müller didn't believe in feelings. He believed only in results. And he had been sent to Auschwitz with a specific mission: to increase the extermination rate by 20% within the next 3 months. Upon his arrival, Müller began questioning everything. He inspected the reports. He interrogated the prisoners. He checked the figures. And very quickly, he noticed anomalies. Why do some trains consistently arrive late? Why do the orders for Zyklon B not match the quantities used? Why do the Sonderkommando rotations seem disorganized when everything should be militarily precise? Müller doesn't yet suspect that this is sabotage, but he knows there's a problem, and he's determined to find it. One morning, he summoned Rourke to his office. The room was icy, austere, decorated only with a portrait of Hitler and a detailed map of the Auschwitz-Birkenau complex. Müller sat behind his desk, impeccable in his black uniform, his hands folded in front of him. "Major Rourke," he said with a cold smile, "I've spent the last few weeks studying your reports. Your work is interesting." Rourke felt his heart race, but he kept a straight face. "Thank you, Obersturmführer." "Interesting," Müller repeats, "because there are inconsistencies, small errors here and there. Nothing serious, of course, but enough to catch my attention." The silence that follows is unbearable. Rourke knows that every word he utters could betray him, so he chooses to say nothing. Müller stood up, slowly walked around his desk, and stood directly in front of Rourke. "You know what happens to incompetent officers in this camp, Major?" "Yes, sir." "So I suppose you're going to correct these little inefficiencies, right?" "Of course, sir." Müller smiled. "Perfect. Because Berlin is sending us an inspector general next week, and he's going to check everything, absolutely everything. If something doesn't add up, if a single figure is wrong, if a single procedure isn't followed, well, let's just say there will be consequences." Rourke nods and leaves the office, his back drenched in cold sweat. He now knows he's walking a tightrope. One wrong move, and everything will explode. That night, he met Levin in a secluded corner of the administrative offices. He told him about the interview with Müller. Levin listened in silence, then murmured, "They know. They don't know exactly what yet, but they know something's not right." Rourke nodded. "What do we do?" Levin looked at him for a long time, then said something Rourke would never forget. "We'll keep going, because if we stop now, all the lives we've saved will have been for nothing." And that's exactly what they're doing. The Inspector General arrives on a Monday morning, in a freezing rain that turns the camp's paths into rivers of black mud. His name is Standartenführer Friedrich von Helldorf, and his reputation precedes him like a deathly shadow. Von Helldorf is no mere bureaucrat. He is a hardline ideologue, a man who personally oversaw the liquidation of several ghettos in Poland and Lithuania. He tolerates no weakness, no inefficiency, no deviation from Nazi doctrine. Upon his arrival, he demanded a complete inspection of all facilities. He wanted to see the logs, production reports, Zyklon B stocks, train schedules, staff rotations, and mortality statistics. Everything had to be checked, cross-checked, and validated, and woe betide anyone who couldn't account for the slightest discrepancy. Rourke knows he's now gambling with his life every moment. The small errors he slipped into the documents over the weeks might seem insignificant on their own, but if someone examines them all together, with a methodical and suspicious eye, a pattern could emerge, a pattern that would lead him straight to the gallows. The first day of the inspection is filled with unbearable tension. Von Helldorf walks through the administrative offices with surgical precision, asking pointed questions, demanding explanations for the slightest discrepancy between the projected and actual figures. Müller accompanies him, clearly delighted to have a superior who shares his obsessive vision of efficiency. Rourke remained in the background, observing the scene like a condemned man awaiting his verdict. He saw von Helldorf leaf through the ledgers kept by Samuel Levin. He saw him frown upon discovering inconsistencies in the convoy dates. He saw him point to a column of figures that didn't match. "Who is responsible for these documents?" von Helldorf asked in a dry voice. Müller turned to Levin, who was standing near his work table, his face pale but dignified. "This prisoner, sir. Number 174, 832. A Polish Jew." Von Helldorf approaches Levin. He looks at him as one looks at an insect. "Can you count Jew?" Levin did not answer immediately. Rourke held his breath. Then Levin said calmly, in impeccable German, "Yes, sir. I was a professor of mathematics at the University of Warsaw." Von Helldorf burst into contemptuous laughter. "A Jewish professor? How ironic. And despite all your supposed intelligence, you can't even line up figures correctly in a ledger." Levin lowers his eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. Working conditions are difficult. Sometimes I make mistakes." "Mistakes?" von Helldorf repeated. "Mistakes that cost time, money, and jeopardize the Reich's war effort. Do you know what we do to saboteurs, Jew?" The silence that followed was abysmal. Rourke felt panic rising within him. If Levin broke down, if he spoke, it would all be over. But Levin didn't break down. He remained motionless, silent, accepting the humiliation without flinching. Finally, von Helldorf turned away with a disdainful gesture. "Replace him. Find someone more competent, and double-check all the documents produced by this professor." Müller agreed. "Of course, sir. It will be done immediately." Rourke felt an immense weight fall upon his shoulders. Levin was going to be replaced, perhaps executed, and without him, the fragile sabotage network they had built together would collapse. But he can't do anything. Not now. Not in front of von Helldorf. The day continued in an atmosphere of contained terror. Von Helldorf inspected the railway tracks, the selection ramps, the gas chambers, the crematoria. He took meticulous notes, asking technical questions about the maximum capacity of the ovens, the time required to empty a gas chamber, and the methods of disposing of the bodies. Rourke accompanies him, answering questions with mechanical precision, hiding the horror he feels behind a mask of cold professionalism. Every word he utters makes him want to vomit, but he continues, because he has no choice. That evening, after von Helldorf left for his private quarters, Rourke slipped discreetly toward the administrative prisoners' barracks. He needed to see Levin. He needed to know if he was all right. He needed to find a way to continue. He finds him sitting on a rotten wooden bunk in an overcrowded block where hundreds of skeletal men are crammed together in an unbearable stench. Levin looks up as he approaches. There is a strange resignation in his eyes, as if he already knows his time is running out. "They're going to kill me, aren't they?" Levin asked without preamble. Rourke isn't lying. Probably. Mueller is going to make an example of him, to show von Helldorf that he won't tolerate any incompetence. Levin nodded slowly. "Then we must act now, before it's too late." "How can we act?" "Von Helldorf is watching everything. The slightest suspicious move and we're dead." "Exactly," said Levin, leaning towards him. "Let's take advantage of his presence. Let's create such a significant diversion that it will overshadow everything else." Rourke frowned. "What are you talking about?" Levin pulls a crumpled notebook covered in notes from under his bunk. "For months I've been studying the schedules, the rotations, the procedures. I know exactly when the system is most vulnerable. Tomorrow night there will be a shift change at 10 p.m. For 15 minutes, there will be almost no one to monitor the Zyklon B warehouse section. If someone could cause an incident there, a fire for example, all attention would be diverted." "A fire in a toxic gas warehouse? Are you crazy? It could kill hundreds of people, or save thousands," Levin retorted. "Because while everyone is running to put out the fire, no one will be monitoring the arriving convoys. No one will be checking the selections. No one will be counting the prisoners sent to forced labor instead of the gas chambers." Rourke remained silent, weighing the pros and cons of this madness. "It's risky. Terribly risky. But it might also be the only chance they'll ever have." "And you?" he finally asked. "What's become of you in all this?" Levin smiled sadly. "I probably won't be here tomorrow night, but you will be, and you can finish what we started." That night, Rourke didn't sleep. He stayed awake, turning Levin's plan over in his mind, searching for flaws, dangers, consequences. He thought of his wife, his son, the life he had abandoned in America. He wondered if they would still recognize him, now a ghost wearing the enemy's uniform. But he also thinks of the little girl he saw that night near the crematoria. Of all the children, all the mothers, all the fathers who arrive every day on these trains of hell, without knowing that they will die within the hour, and he makes his decision. The next morning, Levin disappeared. Officially transferred to another section of the camp. Unofficially probably executed in the basement of Block 11, where the Nazis tortured and killed those they considered saboteurs. Rourke grits his teeth and continues his work as if nothing were amiss. He runs into Mueller in a corridor. The SS officer gives him a satisfied look. "The competence problem has been resolved, Major. We have a new prisoner to keep the records, someone much more reliable." "Perfect," Rourke replied in a neutral voice. But in his pocket he clutches the notebook Levin entrusted to him. The notebook containing all the details of the plan. The exact time, the precise location, the window of opportunity. 10 p.m., warehouse B7. 15 minutes. All day long, Rourke prepares himself mentally. He locates fire extinguishers, emergency exits, and less monitored areas. He memorizes routes, distances, and blind spots. He becomes a machine, cold, calculating, and determined. Von Helldorf spent the day writing his final report on the camp's efficiency. He seemed satisfied. The anomalies he had detected were attributed to the incompetence of a prisoner who had now been eliminated. The system was intact. The machine could continue to function. But that evening, at precisely 10 p.m., as the guards changed posts and collective attention relaxed for a few minutes, Colin Rourke slipped into the shadows. He's carrying a can of gasoline stolen from the maintenance depot. He knows the route by heart. He knows exactly where to place the fire so it spreads quickly but not too quickly. Just enough to create chaos. Just enough so no one notices what's happening elsewhere. He arrives in front of warehouse B7. His hands are trembling. It's not fear. It's adrenaline. It's the awareness that he is crossing a line that can never be crossed again. He pours the petrol. He lights the match. He watches the flame dance in the darkness, and he throws it away. The ensuing explosion wasn't enormous, but it was spectacular enough to trigger immediate panic. Alarms began blaring. Guards rushed in from all directions. SS officers emerged from their offices shouting contradictory orders, And meanwhile, amidst the total confusion, a train arrives at the selection ramp. A train filled with Hungarian deportees who should all have been gassed within the hour. But that night no one was there to count them. No one was there to make the selection. No one was there to send them to their deaths. And in this chaos, Rourke achieves the impossible. He makes more than 200 people disappear in the forced labor barracks, falsifying the records in a few minutes of controlled madness. When the fire is finally brought under control, von Helldorf is furious. He demands an immediate investigation. Müller promises to find the person responsible. But Rourke had already returned to his office, impassive, innocent, irreproachable. And somewhere in the camp, 200 lives continue to beat. 200 lives that the machine has not managed to devour. For now, the fire in Warehouse B7 marked a turning point. Not only in Rourke's sabotage, but in the very atmosphere of the camp. A ferocious paranoia took hold. Von Helldorf didn't believe it was an accident. Neither did Müller. They knew there was a traitor somewhere in their ranks. Someone who was playing games with the system. Someone who had to be hunted down and destroyed. The following days were a nightmare of checks, interrogations, and widespread suspicion. Every officer, every guard, every prisoner working in the administration was scrutinized. Records were checked line by line. Schedules were cross-checked. Testimonies were recorded and analyzed. Rourke survives this first wave of investigation thanks to his position and apparent irreproachability. He is an American engineer recruited by the Reich, a man with no compromising political past, a cold and methodical professional who does exactly what he is told. Nothing in his outward behavior betrays the silent war he is waging from within. But the pressure is unbearable. Every morning, he wakes up wondering if it's his last day. Every conversation could be a trap. Every document he signs could contain a fatal error. And then there are the dreams, the nightmares that haunt him every night. He dreams of the little girl hidden near the crematoria. He dreams of Samuel Levin, tortured in the basements of Block 11. He dreams of Margaret and her son, somewhere in America, living their lives unaware that the father and husband they thought they knew has become a monster wearing a Nazi uniform. Sometimes in these dreams, he sees himself standing in front of a mirror, but the reflection that shows him his gaze is not his own. It's Müller's, or von Helldorf's, or any of those men who transformed murder into bureaucracy. And he wakes up with a start, covered in sweat, wondering where the line really lies between executioner and victim, between accomplice and resistance fighter. In early March 1944, von Helldorf returned to Berlin. His final report was harsh but not catastrophic. He noted inefficiencies, security breaches, and suspicious incidents. But he had no formal proof of sabotage. Not yet. He recommended increased surveillance and more frequent checks. But he didn't call for any resignations. Müller, on the other hand, is obsessed. The fire humiliated him in front of von Helldorf. He knows his career depends on his ability to maintain order and efficiency at Auschwitz, and he is convinced that someone somewhere is working against him. He begins to conduct his own parallel investigation. He personally interviews the prisoners who were working near the warehouse the night of the fire. He studies the movements of each officer during the critical period. He looks for patterns, anomalies, suspicious coincidences, and slowly, inexorably, he begins to get closer to the truth. One evening, Müller summoned Rourke to his office. This time, the atmosphere was different. Colder, more dangerous. Müller didn't smile. He didn't mince words. He went straight to the point. Major Rourke, I've spent the last few weeks analyzing all the incidents that have occurred since your arrival at the camp. The train delays, the errors in the records, the confusion in the staff rotations, and of course the fire. Rourke remained impassive. I see. And what have you discovered? Obersturmführer. Müller gets up and starts pacing, his hands clasped behind his back. What I discovered is a pattern, not obvious, not spectacular, but there, as if someone were deliberately manipulating the system to reduce its effectiveness, in a subtle way, almost imperceptible. This is a very serious accusation. This isn't an accusation yet, Major. It's an observation, but I'll ask you directly, Have you noticed anything unusual in the way the camp is operating? Anyone behaving suspiciously? Rourke thought quickly. It was a test. Mueller knew nothing concrete, but he was looking for a reaction, a hesitation, a sign of guilt. Rourke decided to take a calculated risk. If you'll allow me to be honest, Obersturmführer, I think the problem stems from the complexity of the system itself. We deal with thousands of people every day. Trains arrive from all over Europe. Prisoners come from dozens of different countries. The logistical coordination is monumental. Friction, errors, and unforeseen events are inevitable. Mueller stops and stares intently at Rourke. So you think there's no sabotage? That it's all just a series of unfortunate events? I think we need to differentiate between incompetence and treason, and so far, I haven't seen any evidence of treason. The silence that followed was interminable. Then Mueller smiled slowly. You are a pragmatic man, Major Rourke, I appreciate that. But allow me to offer you some advice. In this camp, the difference between incompetence and treason is often a matter of perspective, and the perspective of the SS judges is rarely charitable. I will remember this. Perfect, you may go. Rourke left the office, his heart pounding. He knew he had just narrowly escaped disaster, but he also knew that Mueller wouldn't give up. The SS officer was like a hunting dog that had smelled blood. He wouldn't stop until he found his prey. The following weeks were a hell of suppressed anxiety. Rourke continued his sabotage, but with much more caution. He spaced out the incidents. He varied his methods. He became even more invisible, even more ghostly. But the Auschwitz machine was relentless. Every day, new transports arrived. Every day, thousands of people were gassed, burned, reduced to ashes. The spring of 1944 saw the massive influx of Hungarian Jews, and the camp reached unprecedented levels of horror. The crematoria were no longer sufficient. Open pits were dug where bodies were burned by the hundreds. Rourke witnesses all of this, powerless and desperate. His small acts of sabotage save a few dozen lives here and there, but faced with the scale of the catastrophe, it's a drop in the ocean of blood. He begins to doubt, to wonder if all this makes sense, if his efforts are not insignificant in the face of the industrial machinery of Nazi death. It is in this state of mind that he has an encounter that will change everything. One evening, while conducting a routine inspection of the forced labor sections, he came across a woman. She shouldn't be there. She should have been dead for a long time. But she was alive. Skeletal, exhausted, but alive. Their eyes meet. And suddenly Rourke recognizes her. It's the little girl. The little girl he saw near the crematoria that night months before. Except she's not so little anymore. She's aged 10 years in a few months. Her face is gaunt. Her eyes are empty. But it's her. Rourke is frozen. How did she survive? How is that possible? The woman looks at him too. There's something in her eyes. Recognition. A memory. She says nothing. She can't speak in front of the guards. But Rourke understands. She remembers him. She remembers the chocolate bar. She remembers that he didn't report her. That evening, Rourke managed to find a moment to speak to her briefly in a secluded corner of the camp. Her name was Rachel. She was 7 years old when she arrived at Auschwitz with her mother and 2 brothers. They were all gassed immediately. But she, by some incomprehensible miracle, managed to slip away from the line. A prisoner hit her. Then another. Then another. For months, she survived by pretending to be older than she was, working in kitchens, making herself invisible. No one knew how she did it, but she was there, a silent witness to hell. "Why didn't you report me that night?" she asks in a barely audible voice. Rourke doesn't know what to say. How can he explain that he saw in her all that remained of humanity in this place of absolute dehumanization? "I don't know," he finally said. "Maybe because I needed to believe that everyone here wasn't already dead." Rachel looks at him with infinitely old eyes. "We're all dead here. Some are still walking, that's all." This conversation haunts Rourke for days. He realizes that even his most successful acts of sabotage do nothing to change the fundamental reality. Auschwitz is a machine designed to destroy humanity itself. Not just bodies, souls. And he begins to understand that if he truly wants to make a difference, he must take an even greater risk. A risk that could save hundreds of lives, or kill him instantly. In mid-April 1944, Rourke learned that an exceptional convoy was planned. More than 4,000 Hungarian Jews were to arrive in the coming days. It was one of the largest transports ever organized. Müller was in charge of logistics. He wanted everything to be perfect. He wanted the extermination to be swift, efficient, and exemplary. Rourke studies the plans. He sees an opportunity. Just one. Risky. Almost suicidal. But possible. If someone could delay the convoy's arrival by 24 hours, the gas chambers would already be occupied by another transport. The new arrivals would have to be temporarily housed in the quarantine barracks. And in these barracks, with forged documents and skillful manipulation, it would be possible to pass some of them off as skilled workers rather than condemned prisoners. It wouldn't be everyone. Maybe a few hundred out of 4,000. But it would be something. It would be a victory. Rourke knows what he has to do. He has to sabotage the railway. Not spectacularly, just enough to create a plausible technical delay, a maintenance incident that can't be attributed to anyone in particular. But to do this, he must leave the camp at night. He must go onto the tracks. He must act in the dark, under the constant threat of being discovered by patrols. And if he is caught, there will be no possible excuse, no escape, only torture and death. Rourke spends 3 days preparing. He steals tools from maintenance workshops. He memorizes patrol schedules. He identifies the exact spot where he can intervene unseen. On the chosen night, he waits until midnight. Then he slips out of his quarters, crosses the shadowy areas of the camp, crosses a secondary fence that he has previously loosened, and finds himself in the icy Polish countryside. The silence is absolute. Only the wind whistles through the bare trees. In the distance, the chimneys of Auschwitz continue to spew their toxic smoke into the starry sky. Rourke trudged through the snow, his heart pounding, each step a silent prayer. He reached the railway tracks. He took out his tools. He began to loosen the bolts holding the rails in place. Not completely. Just enough to create an instability that would cause a minor derailment. He works quickly, precisely, and silently. And suddenly he hears a noise. Voices. A patrol. Rourke froze. The voices drew closer. He saw flashlights sweeping the area. He didn't have time to finish. He didn't have time to flee. He throws himself into a snowy ditch, sinks into the icy mud, and holds his breath. The guards pass a few meters from him. They talk about their lives, their families, the war that is going badly for Germany. They don't see him. After what seemed like an eternity, they walked away. Rourke waits another 10 minutes, then gets up, shivering with cold and adrenaline. He quickly finishes his work, then returns to camp by the same route. He arrives at his quarters just before dawn. He goes to bed, exhausted, terrified, but also strangely relieved. The next day, the convoy derailed 15 kilometers from Auschwitz. No one was injured, but the delay was 26 hours. And during those 26 hours, Rourke worked miracles. He falsified documents. He bribed prisoner officials. He manipulated the selections. When the convoy finally arrived at the camp, 347 people had been reclassified as essential workers. They would not be gassed. Not that day. Perhaps never. 347 lives snatched from the machine. But the price of this victory is terrible. Because Müller noticed the derailment, he noticed the altered documents, he noticed the anomalies, and this time he's certain there's a traitor, and that traitor is close. Very close. The manhunt has truly begun. The trap is closing. Müller can no longer sleep. He can no longer eat. He is possessed by a single obsession: to find the traitor. Every morning he summons officers to his office. He interrogates them for hours. He compares their schedules, their movements, their access to sensitive documents. He searches for the flaw, the inconsistency, the proof that will confirm his suspicions. and little by little his attention focuses on Rourke. It's not a certainty. Not yet. But it's a hunch. Miller noticed that every major incident coincided with a period when Rourke had access to crucial information. Train delays, errors in the records, the fire, the derailment. Rourke was always there, in the shadows, present but discreet, efficient but never flashy. Too perfect, Miller thinks. Too clean. One morning in May 1944, Miller made a discovery that changed everything. While searching through officers' personal files, he came across Rourke's recruitment file. He read the details of his American past, his discharge, his debts, his family who had remained in the United States. And above all, he read the psychological assessments made during his induction. Emotionally fragile subject, loyalty to the Reich conditional, recommendation, increased surveillance. Miller smiled. He was holding something. The next day he summoned Rourke, but this time, it wasn't a simple interrogation. It was a confrontation. Rourke enters the office and immediately understands that something has changed. Miller is standing by the window watching the chimney smoking in the distance. He doesn't turn around when Rourke enters. He lets the silence settle in, heavy and menacing. Finally he speaks. "Do you know what I find fascinating, Major Rourke?" "No, sir." "The way traitors betray themselves, not through spectacular acts, but through details, small contradictions, invisible patterns that become obvious when you take the time to observe them." Rourke felt his blood run cold, but he kept a neutral expression. "I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at." Miller turned abruptly. "Really? Then let me be clearer. I spent 3 months analyzing every incident that occurred in this camp. And do you know what I discovered? That you are the only common denominator. You were present every time. You had access to the information every time. You were in a position to act every time. It's my job to be present and have access to information. I am the first deputy commander." "Exactly. And that's precisely what makes you the perfect suspect." The silence that follows is electric. Rourke knows his life is on the line in the next few seconds. He can deny it. He can defend himself or he can attack. He chose to attack. "If you had proof, Obersturmführer, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You would have arrested me already. The fact that I'm still standing before you proves that you have nothing, only suspicions." Miller smiled. "You're intelligent, Major. I'll grant you that. But intelligence isn't always enough. Sometimes applying the right amount of pressure is enough to break even the strongest man." He walks around his desk and takes out a folder which he places in front of Rourke. "Do you recognize these names?" Rourke opens the folder. His heart stops. They are photos. Photos of Margaret, of his son, of their old house in Cleveland. "Your family," Miller said softly, "who still live in the United States, in an enemy country, a country that could easily consider your presence here as treason." Rourke looked up, rage rising within him. "Don't involve them in this." "Oh, but they're already involved in that, Major. Because you see, if you're a traitor, then they're complicit by association. And the Reich has long arms, even in America. It's a direct threat, a threat to everything Rourke still loves in this world. And Miller knows it. He sees the crack opening in Rourke's armor. "So here's what we're going to do," Miller continued. "You're going to tell me the truth. Everything, the sabotage, the complicity, the methods. And in exchange, I guarantee your family's safety. I can even arrange your transfer to another camp far from here. You'll survive. So will they." Rourke closes his eyes. He thinks of Margaret, of his son who must be 9 years old now, growing up without a father, who will never know what his father went through, what he did, what became of him. He also thinks of Rachel, of Samuel Levin, of the 347 lives he saved from the last convoy, of all those he could still save if he continues, and he makes the most difficult decision of his life. "You have nothing against me," he said calmly, "because there is nothing. I am not a traitor. I am an engineer doing my job under impossible conditions. If you want to destroy me, You will have to fabricate evidence. And that, Obersturmführer, is your problem, not mine." Müller remained motionless for a long moment. Then he burst out laughing, a cold, humorless laugh. "You're brave, Major. Or suicidal. I haven't decided yet. Perhaps both. Very well. Since you refuse to cooperate, I will have to get my answers some other way. From now on, you are under constant surveillance. Every document you sign will be checked. Every move you make will be recorded. Every conversation you have will be listened to. And at the first misstep, the first confirmed suspicion, I will destroy you, you and everyone you hold dear." "Got it. Perfect. You may go." Rourke leaves the office, his body trembling with adrenaline and suppressed rage. He knows everything has changed. He is now a target. Every move will be scrutinized. Every decision will be analyzed. He can no longer afford the slightest mistake. But he also knows that he cannot stop. Because if he stops, everything he has done so far will have been for nothing. The following days were a nightmare of tension. Rourke felt constantly watched. Officers he didn't know followed him discreetly. His documents were checked 3 times before being validated. His quarters were searched regularly under the pretext of routine inspections. Müller tightens the noose methodically, patiently, waiting for Rourke to crack. But Rourke doesn't crack. He becomes even more cautious, even more invisible. He ceases all direct sabotage. He focuses on his official work, impeccable, irreproachable. And meanwhile, he's preparing a final move. A move so audacious that no one will be able to anticipate it. In early June 1944, Rourke learned that an exceptional convoy was arriving. This time, it wasn't carrying Jews but Polish resistance fighters captured after the Warsaw Uprising. 2,000 men, women, and children who had dared to fight against the Nazi occupiers. They were all to be publicly executed as an example. Müller is personally overseeing the operation. He wants it to be spectacular. He wants the terror to be absolute. But Rourke sees an opportunity, a last chance to make a big impact before everything falls apart. The night before the convoy's arrival, he puts his craziest plan into action. He doesn't sabotage the trains. He doesn't falsify documents. He does something far more dangerous. It infiltrates communications. Using his access to the camp's communication systems, he sent an encrypted message to the Polish resistance networks. The message contained the exact details of the convoy, the time of arrival, the route, and the vulnerable points. It's a crazy gamble. If the message is intercepted, he'll be immediately identified as the traitor. But if the message gets through, the resistance could organize an attack to free the prisoners before they reach Auschwitz. The next morning, the convoy never arrived. News trickled in. The train was attacked by Polish partisans 50 kilometers from the camp. A fierce battle ensued. Many died on both sides. But more than 1,000 prisoners managed to escape into the surrounding forests. Müller is furious. He screams, pounds his desk, and demands answers. How did the resistance fighters know? How could they have organized such a precise attack? And suddenly, his gaze falls on Rourke. This time, there is no more doubt, no more questions, only absolute certainty. "It was you," Müller said in a flat voice. "It was you from the beginning." Rourke doesn't deny it, nor does he confirm it. He simply looks Müller in the eyes, and for the first time in months he smiles. Müller doesn't shout. He doesn't brandish his weapon. He simply remains motionless, staring at Rourke with an icy intensity that seems to drain all the oxygen from the room. Then, very slowly, he picks up his phone and dials an internal number. "Send an arrest team to Major Rourke's office. Immediately." Rourke doesn't move. He knows it's all over. There's no escape. No more lies. No more masks to wear. In a few minutes, he'll be chained, dragged to the basement of Block 11, tortured until he reveals all his contacts, all his methods, all his secrets. But strangely, he feels liberated, as if an overwhelming weight has just been lifted from his shoulders. "You've ruined everything," Müller said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Months of work, thousands of lives you've stolen from the Reich. Do you realize what you've done?" "Yes," Rourke replied calmly. I saved innocent people. I slowed down your killing machine. I resisted. You have betrayed us. Betrayed whom? A regime that turns murder into an industry? A system that burns children alive? No, Obersturmführer. I betrayed no one. I simply refused to become like you. Miller took a step towards him, his hand on his pistol. You will pay. For every life you saved, I will take 10. For every act of sabotage, I will double the rate of fire. Your pathetic resistance will have been in vain. Rourke smiled sadly. Perhaps, but at least I'll die a man, not a monster. The door bursts open. 4 SS guards enter, weapons drawn. Müller gestures. Arrest him, take him to Block 11, and inform Commandant Huss. I want him personally present at the interrogation. The guards roughly grabbed Rourke, twisted his arms behind his back, and dragged him out of the office. As they went through the door, Rourke turned back to Müller one last time. You know what's funny? You're going to spend the rest of your life looking for my accomplices. But you'll never find them, because most of them are already dead. And those who survive don't even know who I really am. Müller does not respond. He watches Rourke disappear down the corridor, then returns to sit at his desk, his hands trembling. Rourke is locked in a cell in Block 11, a tiny, windowless room where the smell of dried blood permeates the walls. He knows what will come next. Torture. Endless interrogations. A slow, humiliating death. But something strange happens. Hours pass. Then days. No one comes. No interrogation. No torture. Just silence and darkness. Rourke doesn't understand. Why are they waiting? What is Müller planning? The answer arrives on the 5th day. The door to his cell opens. But it's not Müller who enters. It's a man Rourke has never seen before. A civilian around 40 years old wearing a crisp gray suit and round glasses. He looks like an accountant or a civil servant, certainly not a Nazi. Major Rourke, the man said in English with a perfect American accent. My name is David Friedman. I work for the OSS. Rourke remains silent, unable to understand what is happening. Friedman smiled. I know it's hard to believe, but you have to trust me. We don't have much time. How did you get in here? Let's just say we have our methods. The important thing is that we know what you've done. All the sabotage, all the lives you've saved. You're a hero, Major, and we're going to get you out of here. Rourke shook his head in disbelief. It's impossible. Müller is watching me. The whole camp is watching me. Müller is dead. The words land like a bomb. Rourke stares at Friedman, searching for the lie in his eyes, but he finds none. What? 3 days ago, Müller was found dead in his office. Officially, it was suicide. In reality, it was an execution. We have agents infiltrated everywhere in this camp, Major, including among the SS officers. Müller had become a problem. He knew too much. He was digging too deep. We had to eliminate him. Rourke felt the world crumble around him. You knew from the beginning? Friedman agreed. From the day you were recruited by the Nazis, we knew they were looking for American engineers for their projects. We infiltrated their recruitment network, and when your name came up, we saw an opportunity. You used me. We gave you a mission that you accomplished brilliantly. Rourke explodes. A mission? I lived in hell for months. I saw things no human being should ever see. I wore the uniform of those monsters, and you're telling me it was planned? Friedman remained calm. We couldn't tell you. If you had known you were working for us, you would never have been so convincing. Your despair was real. Your resistance was genuine. That's precisely what made your sabotage so effective. No one would have suspected a truly broken man. Rourke collapses onto the icy cell floor. Everything he's been through, everything he's endured, everything he's sacrificed. It was all a manipulation, a game of chess where he was just a pawn. My family, he murmured. Margaret and my son. Are they safe? Absolutely. They were relocated as soon as you left. New identity, new life. They believe you died in an industrial accident in 1939. We even organized a funeral for them." Rourke looks up, tears streaming down his face. "They think I'm dead? It was the only way to protect them, and to protect you. If the Nazis had discovered they were alive and accessible, they would have used them against you. Now, listen to me. We have to leave. In 1 hour there will be a prisoner transfer to Mauthausen. You will be among them, but under a false identity. Once there, our agents will help you escape. You will be repatriated to the United States." "And then what? What do I do? Do I live with the lie forever?" Friedman placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're alive, Major. That's already huge. Thousands of people are alive today because of you. Children who weren't gassed, families who survived. You saved more lives than you'll ever know." 3 weeks later, Colin Rourke is back in America. Officially, he was released from a prisoner of war camp after being captured in Europe. His identity has been changed, his past rewritten. He can never speak about what he went through, never reveal what he did. It's the price of his survival. He tries to find Margaret and her son, but the OSS refuses. Too dangerous, they say. Too risky. They have a new life. Bringing him back into their lives could destroy everything. Then Rourke disappears. He takes a new name, settles in a small town in Montana, and spends the next 30 years working as a mechanic. No one knows who he really is. No one knows his story. He never married. He had no close friends. He lived alone, haunted by the ghosts of Auschwitz, by the faces of those he saved and those he could not save. In 1978, a historian specializing in the Holocaust stumbled upon declassified documents mentioning an American engineer who had infiltrated Auschwitz. He began to investigate. He tracked down Rourke. When he contacted him, Rourke was 76 years old. He was frail, ill, and worn down by decades of silence. The historian asked him to testify, to tell his story, to allow the world to know. Rourke initially refused. Then he agreed, on one condition. His testimony would only be published after his death. He died 3 months later of a heart attack, alone in his small house in Montana. His testimony was published in 1979. It caused a shock in the historical community. Auschwitz survivors began to come forward. Some remembered small, inexplicable miracles, trains arriving late, selections that went wrong, documents that mysteriously disappeared. One survivor in particular is attracting attention. Her name is Rachel Stein. She lives in Israel, and she tells the story of a 7-year-old girl who survived Auschwitz thanks to a mysterious officer who gave her a chocolate bar and didn't betray her. "I didn't know his name," she said in an interview, "but I knew he was different. He had the eyes of a dead man, but also the eyes of a man who refused to die." Today, Colin Rourke's name appears discreetly in several museums dedicated to the Holocaust, not as a glorious hero, but as a reminder that even in absolute hell, even in the most efficient industrial death machine ever built, resistance was possible. Every life saved was a victory, that each act of sabotage was a spark of humanity in the darkness. And sometimes, the true heroes are those whose names no one knows, those who fought in silence, those who paid the highest price without ever receiving recognition. Colin Rourke was one of them, a ghost in the death machine, a man who chose to resist when he could have obeyed, a saboteur who transformed Auschwitz, if only briefly, into a place where hope refused to die. So now ask yourself, what about you? What would you have done in his place? Would you have had the courage to resist alone, knowing that each day could be your last? Would you have sacrificed your identity, your family, your entire life to save strangers? These questions are uncomfortable. They have to be, because they force us to acknowledge that heroism is not always glorious, that it is often lonely, painful, and without reward. If this story moved you, subscribe, share it, because some truths deserve to be preserved, some heroes deserve to be known, and some lessons must never be forgotten. History repeats itself when we stop listening to it. Don't let silence win. In 2003, a discreet ceremony took place at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. A tree was planted there in honor of Colin Rourke, posthumously recognized as righteous among the nations. Rachel Stein, then 66 years old, was present. In her hands, she held a faded photograph, that of a man with a weary gaze, wearing a uniform he detested. "He saved my life without even knowing me," she told reporters. "He saved hundreds of other people without ever asking for recognition. He died alone, haunted by what he had seen, unable to find his own family. That was the price he paid for his resistance." Historical research reveals that Rourke likely saved between 800 and 200 people during his 6 months at Auschwitz, a paltry number compared to the millions of victims. But for each of those people, for their children, their grandchildren, their descendants, that number means everything. Margaret Rourke, Colin's wife, died in 1987 without ever knowing that her husband had survived the war. Their son, now a history professor, discovered the truth in 2004 when he read the published account. He broke down in tears upon realizing that the man he believed to be dead had remained alive for decades, bearing alone the crushing weight of his past. "My father was a hero," he declared at a conference, "but he was also a victim of a system that crushed his humanity to make it a weapon. He won the moral battle, but he lost his life. That is the true cost of resistance." Today, in a small room of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, a plaque bears these simple words: "To all those who resisted in the shadows, to those whose names we will never know, to those who chose humanity when the world chose barbarity." Colin Rourke wasn't perfect, he wasn't invincible, he was just a man who refused to back down, and perhaps that's the greatest lesson of its history. Resistance doesn't begin with spectacular acts of heroism. It begins with a choice, just one. The choice to remain human when everything pushes you to become a monster. You have that choice every day in every situation, never forget it.